So Connor, before we jump in, can you share a little bit more about Ocrolus with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ocrolus is a fintech company based out of New York City. What does fintech infrastructure mean? It means we basically digitize documents for lenders. We try and make their back office process seamless. What I like to compare it to is to AWS. My perspective is that engineers have no interest in having servers and updating them and maintaining them and scaling them up and scaling them down. And while doing all this, making sure that it's the same experience, whether you're a small company or a blue chip company. And we take that same approach to documents for lenders. So give them a seamless back-end process. We can handle everything from receiving the documents. We use technology, a combination of off-the-shelf and proprietary technology. And then we have this massive verifier infrastructure in India, which is about nearly 1,000 people that make sure that we get to that 100% accuracy. So it's that combination of technology and the human in the loop to give people something that's faster and higher quality than anything else that's out in the market.
Very cool, and very relevant to the price to the CFO role. Always is how do you what does the pricing model end up looking like, and then that from there flows everything else, right?
Yeah, we are the flavor of the month, usage-based billing, which everyone loves. Everyone loves reporting on it. Everyone was talking about Snowflake and what their net retention numbers are and Twilio and all those kinds of things. And accounting hates it. So we deal with all the complexities around that. So it's usage-based. It's arranged based on applications process. So primarily we've lenders, and typically in two industries of mortgage and small business lending, but also prop tech and consumer and other areas. And we build them per application that they process.
Got it. What are the metrics that you're tracking most religiously at Ocrolus right now?
Yeah. So I think the one that we always come back to is net dollar retention or net revenue retention. That's the one that has always been our strongest number. It's quite funny, actually. We have this monthly deck that we've worked on over the last 12, 18, 24 months that we send to our board. And we're very proud of it. And the investors always tell us it's one of the best that they see and has a bunch of metrics in it. And I naively assume that they read every single page from cover to cover before. And we had our last board meeting, and one of our board members mentioned, "I love the deck, but I only look at one slide," and that's our cohort slide. And so that's the one we care about most. Just are you just evidence that people get on our platform and they grow with us. And so that's what he's always focused on, is make that process as short and as seamless as possible to get people on, get people using you. When they use you, they'll love you and they'll grow with you.
I feel like cohorts and net revenue retention are important for all sorts of subscription companies, but maybe even super extra important for usage-based subscription companies. I'm curious whether you agree or disagree, and your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think we try to, so coming back to the part that accounting teams hate and FP&A teams hate is some of the other SaaS metrics, because they're difficult to measure. We had a conversation recently with an investor talking about how do you think about downsell and churn and splitting out so your net retention between those different areas. And it's just super challenging. We also have the joy that we are affected by seasonality due to business days in the month. So March is a long month, so our revenue is higher. April is a shorter month, our revenue is shorter, and trying to figure out how do we normalize that. But then you also think about, okay, well, what's that mean from a upsell and downsell perspective? Was there an actual downsell, or there was just less months or less days, business days in the month, and so revenue is lower? And so it's definitely a challenge on some other more traditional SaaS metrics. I think of that side. I think LTV is a challenge for us of how do we model that out? Because again, we care less about what people are doing today. We just want them to get on, and we know that over time they'll grow. So how do you model that over time? Booked ARR is a challenge because it's not just about what they're doing today, but what we think they'll be in 6 months. And it's tough at times to find what the right drivers are for that booking number, because you could have a 3-person team that's just a super efficient fintech that's driving a huge amount of volume, or you could have a larger bank that has more people but a similar amount of application volume. So trying to find the right metrics and from what you correlate what they're going to be in 6 months with that expected application volume. So yeah, I think we look at everything, we report everything. We have our beautiful 30-page deck, as I mentioned, but it's trying to figure out, so take the noise out and focus on the ones of value. I think one other area we see with challenge in this space is that I think you hear about a lot of usage-based business models. You hear about Snowflake and Twilio and others where there's some concentration of clients. And so what we try and do is filter down to take out the long tail of clients. So let's focus on the top X% of clients. Let's forget about the smaller clients that really don't matter from a true business growth perspective, and then report on those to try and give more insight into what's happening from month to month rather than the noise drowning everything out.
That's amazing. There's so much nuance there. Some of which is specific to your business, some of it's specific to the model, and some of it is just general for everyone. Yeah, I'm curious, like, what does your team that manages all this look like? Like, who do you have on there, and how are they doing it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've actually gone back and forth. So we have an accounting and finance team. About 2/3 of the team are based in our India office, and the rest in our US office. But the challenge has been around the skill set. So we have, like, if you think we're processing millions of pages of documents every month, and that goes through different price books depending on what kind of document it is and how do you report on that. If you think about processing for an application could be made up of 50, 100, 300 different documents. They could all get submitted on day one, which is unlikely. They probably are submitted over time. So how do you track that from week to week to month to month? So it's definitely been a massive challenge. But we've been fortunate with our company. We have basically a dedicated, what we call business analytics team. And their skill is a little different from what we would have on the finance and accounting side. Strong at SQL, Python, Tableau. We leverage them pretty heavily to help build the reporting that we need in order to then have somewhat automated processes on our side to process invoicing and reporting and things like that. But it's interesting because it's something we've gone back and forth about. At one stage, we said, well, should we have someone with SQL experience within the FP&A team? Because there's a lot of ways we're trying to cut the data. And I think we ultimately decided against that because it's everyone else's skill set with an FP&A is very different from that. And then just having a career path for someone of like, okay, you're the one SQL person with FP&A, but who's going to coach you and mentor you and give you a path of growth over time? It felt the best place was to keep that expertise specialized and centralized within our BA team.
That makes sense. And so the BI team serves the finance team, but then also who else?
Everybody, actually. That's been an interesting evolution. Also, is we have 3 teams that work super closely with each other and have some overlap depending on what they're looking at. So we have our business analytics team, we have our revenue operations team, which is pretty sophisticated, and then we have an FP&A team. And my constant concern is that they're doing the same thing twice. So I care less about who does it and more that it gets done and it gets done in the best way possible. And so that's actually something we've been working as a company to flesh out over the last 3 months, is making sure we can as much as possible define what the different roles are. And our current thinking is that we have a data infrastructure team that actually designed the pipes between either proprietary systems or from other systems, QuickBooks, whichever system it is we're working with, and build those integrations. And then we have our BA team that is responsible for building those goal tables and combining the data, building the goal tables, and then doing an initial level of analytics that might serve everything from RevOps directly, or it might be operationally focused of, like, again, we have this massive verifier org where we care about turnaround time and quality and time on task, and really generating all those insights that investors might care less about. And then from an FP&A perspective, how we've tried to position best is if an investor cares about it from a dollars and cents perspective, we should care about it, and it's something we should be looking at. So that's how we've defined it now. If it's margin related, so the way it works for these verifiers is they're actually paid per task. So for every document that comes to the door, it's broken down into a series of tasks, and then they're compensated based on that. And so that's something we care about. The BA team are involved to help do analysis and regression analysis on that task page to make sure it's sort of driving the right behaviors. But then we're also involved from a margin perspective to make sure it's driving the right levels that we expect from investors. And the same on the RevOps side, around working close with them around pipeline and quotas and attainment, and just making sure that we're aligned on projections. So there's a few different groups. There's a lot of overlap, and it creates a lot of gray area, which creates confusion. But we're getting better with it over time.
The margin stuff is really interesting because I feel like depending on the business, sometimes there's like per customer margin is really not that different than overall margin, and sometimes per customer margin can be quite a bit different. And it seems like you're probably in the latter camp. But the accounting and the analysis work almost like explodes in complexity when you're trying to figure that out. No?
You're exactly right. You should come over to work with us. It is. Well, I guess it's two ways. So I guess it does get very complicated depending on how deep we go down. There is a lot of overlap. So we usually try and think of things in buckets. So if you think in terms of our product offerings again, we have a small business lender that typically does bank statements. Usually they're going to fall into a certain margin profile. If you think of mortgage clients and they're doing a variety of documents and larger applications and things like that, they will have a slightly different margin profile. So there's definitely variety between clients, because some might process all or only part of applications, but you can kind of begin to think of, okay, this is the range I expect 90% of clients to be in this particular bucket, but there are without exceptions.
It's fascinating stuff. Very cool. How do you, given the sort of like everything from the various analysis needs, the margin stuff, like your finance team is doing a lot, and how do you make sure that they have access to the right data and tools and skills to be able to manage all of this?
It's a good question, and I don't think we definitely haven't fully solved it yet. I think the partnership with the BA team, our business analytics teams, is super important to try and get us some way towards clean data. I think the partnership with RevOps is super important, and we definitely have had struggles historically where Salesforce is only as good as the data in it, and if there's inconsistencies, if there's missing data, it just creates this vicious circle of spending all your time trying to clean up the data. But we've much tighter alignment now than we did probably 6 months ago. And then I think the other side is really around prioritization. So there are so many areas in which the finance team can focus. I'm really trying to be super targeted, given it comes back to that again, the partnership with BA and RevOps, trying to be super targeted in where the finance team will offer their expertise. So again, the BA team will work closely with our workforce ops teams, our verifier management team, to help them understand turnaround time and how task prices translate into hourly rates and things like that. The RevOps team is partnering closer with marketing to think about cost per lead, cost of customer acquisition, areas like that. And then finance is acting as a partner to really bring what we think is an investor mindset and investor question set, and then just thinking about from a budget perspective that the metrics that they're working and are more in the weeds of than we are, to help ensure we're driving in the right direction.
Super cool. We're recording this at the end of April 2023, and it's been a rough few months for pretty much everyone in SaaS. And I'm curious, like, what kind of discussions and what kind of strategic decisions are you all contemplating?
Yeah, it's a different world, all right.
Yeah.
I think I think 18 months ago, obviously, like everyone else, it was grow at all costs. So whatever your revenue is today, make sure it's higher next week and next month and the month after. And so that's something that now is really balanced around cash efficiency. Like when we talk earlier about what metrics we're thinking from, I think the pure SaaS one is definitely on the net dollar retention side. But from a overall metrics, it's really around net dollar retention. ARR is always important, but really around cash efficiency. What does cash burn look like? What does your path to profitability look like? I think personally, we did a Series C in 2021. We did a Series C extension. We just completed that in February. And so I definitely don't have any strong desires to be out in the market raising capital, any definitely significant sums of capital at Series C and beyond in the near term. So just really focusing on capital efficiency and how you can balance that growth versus the need for more capital. One thing we actually monitor closely is burn multiple. So what's our net burn and how does that compare to our ARR growth, to make sure that we are really taking the steps necessary to convert that invested capital into ARR.
When it comes to path to profitability, I imagine a lot of it is reliant on sort of how divergent your scenarios are over the next couple of years. And everyone's error bars became much wider recently, but I'm curious like how you think about that portion of things.
Yeah, I think as we project out and think about risk and reward and projections, I think we're at a place now where if we were to present 100% year-over-year growth numbers to our board or to our investors, even though we might have accomplished that previously, it's just not going to be looked on with favor. Like people thinking, yes, you achieved that historically, but you're bigger now, and who knows what's going to happen in the second half of this year. There could be a recession, there could be a mild recession, there could be something worse. And so what we try to do a better job of is just being much more tempered in how optimistic we are. You know, I think that's I think a consistent discussion point between the CEO and CFO. The CEO is, you know, ultimately super optimistic and thinks the world can be accomplished tomorrow, and the CFO, I think their role is to be a little more bearish and not pessimistic, but conservative. And so I think with the shift in the market, for most CEOs, they're probably just hearing it not just from their CFO anymore, but from other areas of, hey, you might want 50, 60, 70, 80% growth year over year, but if you're going to be conservative, now is the time to do it, to make sure that you aren't sort of accelerating into a wall from a capital and a cash perspective. And so I think from my experience, if most CEOs hear it from multiple areas and not just from one area, they're a little more open and receptive to that feedback. So that's been helpful from a CFO perspective about managing CEO expectations and trying to get aligned on what's a reasonable level of growth and capital efficiency to target.
Yep.
I think another thing that's been interesting for us, we actually just today we launched internally our new company values. And when we were first talking about them at a leadership level a couple of months back, I was talking how I wanted to get ruthless prioritization as one of our values. And the feedback was, we can't have it as one of our values until we actually live it. And I think that's one thing that's been interesting over the last 12 months is seeing how leadership teams evolve to that new need. Because again, I don't think if I compare now versus 12 or 18 months ago, the possibilities, especially in the fintech space, they're greater than ever. I don't think they're less than ever. And so nothing has changed from a possibilities perspective. It's more about prioritization. And so seeing how they adapt to, okay, I still have all these things I want to work on. I still have this vision for the company in 12, 18, 24, 36 months and beyond, but how do I stage it and prioritize it so that I can ensure that the resources that I'm invested today are going to actually generate revenue and returns over the next 6 to 12 months, and not just be a strategic vision for 24 plus months out.
Makes so much sense. I mean, we're all sort of the product of our times, and the times have changed, so we're going to adapt, right?
Yeah, and now obviously with all this ChatGPT thing talk, that it's going to be like, oh, we don't need a team of 80 engineers, we just need 2 engineers, and ChatGPT is the new business model they're talking about. But
I'll believe it when I see it.
I know. I've tested it out for a few areas for finance, and I don't know what your experience of it has been, but I find it good for just general templates and just things that are almost legal or accounting rule based, putting together summary of rules or what it might be on that side. But as soon as I go into any numbers or things that require a higher level of accuracy, I really struggle with it, and that's just been my experience.
Yeah, I think it's like clearly transformative, but it's also it's not totally clear where the boundaries of where it's good and really not good are yet.
Yeah.
Like any technology, and like that can get tricky, especially for a system that tends to hallucinate things if it's wrong. And so then you like have an extra tricky time figuring out where the boundary is. Like it's not an error code it gives you an answer that's just wrong.
The stat I always think of is, I think it's like 70 or 80% of drivers say they're better than average drivers. I get that same confidence coming from it all the time of, don't worry, I have all the answers. And then you correct and you go, you're right, I made a mistake. And there's no real sense of, well, if I hadn't caught that, what would have happened? It's like a water off a duck's back. It doesn't mind at all that it's made a mistake. It's like, oh, sorry about that, you're right, here's the mistake, and gives you a new answer. And your question is it actually more efficient to dig into this new answer to see if that's the right answer, or do I accept it blindly, or where do I go? And I think that's a challenge on the efficiency and effectiveness side.
Yeah. It's clearly going to be a fascinating future one way or another, how it turns out. But yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you was, when it comes to fundraising, how would you say raising like a much larger sum, like $80 million, is different than raising smaller sums, like some, single digit millions of dollars? And then how do you think that's now changed, given that the financing environment is quite different?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the big thing comes back to that finance side. Like when I think of finance of a strategic asset to the company, I think of it in a couple of different areas. I think the first area is just as a partner to the business. I think logic and analytics are a core part of a finance skill set, and being able to realize that many people don't have that skill set. So partnering with departments to say, hey, either have you thought about this within the business, and maybe you have, but you just want to flag it, or 2, just helping them position things so it's easier to understand what the story is, what the takeaway is, or what the question is to them. So, hey, we want to buy this. The department says we want to buy this thing, and turn around and saying, well, that means that you've used up your budget, or you'll have to get rid of this thing, and just making it super simple for them. I think on the investor side, it's sort of 2 buckets. The first is, if I think about the accounting side, being as buttoned up as possible. I think when investors meet with a company, they have the CEO or whoever it might be that tells a story, again, the optimistic story of, we're taking over the world and here's where we're going to be. And so they love that for the vision perspective. And then I think their best insight a lot of times to the operational capabilities of the company is through the finance side. So that's where the first signals come through. So it could be just accounting wise of, how long does it take them to close their books? Or is their revenue change every month? Are there a lot of retroactive adjustments? Do they know what sales tax are? And so I think even though these things seem very tactical and just day to day, they can be one of the areas where an investor might get insight into just the operational capabilities of the company from day to day. And then I think the other part is just on the forecasting side and the reporting side. So on the forecasting side from the FP&A, how does finance take that story that the CEO is telling around growth and markets and opportunities and translate it into numbers? And that's that's what, again, investors care most about, the numbers. And so is that a compelling story? Does it seem reasonable? Are the assumptions reasonable? Does it all make sense? Is it bound together in a model that looks like someone who cares about the business and about their work product has prepared it? And then also related to that, what are the other metrics that the company is tracking to ensure that they're tracking towards that successful outcome? So I think definitely on the investor side, there's so much that an investor can gauge from just speaking, hearing what they're doing around how well the company is run on the back end. Accounting is, the less you hear about from accounting, the better. No one wants to hear about tax audits and sales tax forms. So if that's all running smoothly in the background, it usually is a pretty positive signal for how the broader company is being run, especially about the bits that people don't want to think about from day to day. And then really translating that CEO story into a financial story of how the company is going to progress it over time, and give the investor confidence that for all of the CEO's ambition and leadership, that there's someone in the room that also is probably a little more conservative and is making sure that we know what metrics we need to track and hit to accomplish that vision.
Very, very cool. I have a last question for you, which is, given all that you've seen over your career, if you could give one piece of advice to a finance leader, say at a Series B or C or D company, what would you say?
I think advice in a couple areas. I think the first is, I guess, for finance leaders, if it's their first experience in Series C, just trying to realize how important it is to get that foundation working. So on the accounting side, we're seeing more people, or I guess there's a mix of people who might come from an accounting background or might come from an investment banking background or more on that FP&A or finance side. And just realizing how important the accounting part is to get a really solid foundation in place. And so making sure that if they don't want to be involved in sales, tax, accounting, or lease accounting, the recent fun one, or revenue accounting, having someone there that's doing those things, so there's confidence in both the finance side as well as the investors who know to ask these easy questions, that those things are happening. I think another bucket is just on the efficiency side. Again, we spoke about it earlier. I don't think that this is an ideal market, at least to go out and be fundraising. And so you need to be super focused on efficiency. And what's related to that as well is just right optionality. So now more than ever, there's that traditional view that the more you want the money, the less investors want to give it to you. And so really having a solid path to profitability, one that you truly believe you can realize. I think historically there was a tendency at time for people to say, oh yeah, we're going to be profitable in 2 or 3 years. But when you delve into the details, it assumes that they don't hire anyone for the next 3 or 4 years and the margins explode and all those kind of things. But really trying to firm up what that plan looks like, that it's truly realistic, and giving yourself that optionality, because again, I expect that the markets won't be as tight in 12, 18, 24 months as they are now, but they may be, and you really want to give yourself that optionality where you can choose to grow as an individual business that isn't relying on the next round. And that'll be really important for those conversations and negotiations with people. And again, if the market does change or you decide you do want to raise despite that, having those efficiency metrics and showing where that additional dollar of capital goes from a business growth perspective, the importance of that, I don't think is going away from an investor relationship perspective anytime soon.
That's really good advice, and very timely too. Thanks so much for making time to chat with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was very nice to meet you, and I was glad to take part in it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before you go, let me give you a super quick overview of what Subscript is, because chances are we can help you. I started Subscript because in my last business, I had this problem. We had this giant Google spreadsheet, and that's where we kept track of everything about our business. And if you're anything like me, you're a data-driven leader who really cares to understand numbers in order to make sure that you're making the right decisions. But when you're looking at a giant spreadsheet with lots of just tabs on tabs on tabs and lots of people with access, you're probably not looking at the right thing, because you can never be confident that someone didn't mess something up, or that someone didn't fat finger a number, or that you considered all the corner cases that you actually needed to consider. So that's what Subscript does. We help you understand your subscription business at a much deeper level than you ever thought possible. If you'd be interested in giving it a try, come check us out at subscript.com.